So today we are back with another no spoiler review of the next 5 Nancy Drew books in the series. So today we are going to be covering book 16 through book 20. And as always, these are no spoiler reviews, so I will just give you some of my thoughts of these books without spoiling anything and let you know what I rank these books. We will be meeting some more orphans in this set of books, so let's get started with the actual reviews. So the first book we have here is book number 16. This one is called The Clue of the Tapping Heels. This one was originally published in 1939 and the revised story was published in 1969. And here is the synopsis for this story. Challenging questions confront Nancy Drew when she attempts to solve the mystery of the strange tapping sounds in the house of a retired actress. Who is the tapper? How does he gain access to Miss Carter's house despite securely locked doors and windows? Why do the tapping sounds come in Morse code? Is there a sinister motive behind the prowler's actions? While trying to learn the answers to these and other puzzling questions, Nancy finds her investigations complicated by the dishonest administrator of a will and by a thief who steals the actress's prized Persian cats. How Nancy communicates with the ghost-like intruder by tap dancing in code, how she outwits 3 criminals wanted by the police, and how she brings happiness to Miss Carter in a romantic reunion with the actress's former leading man will thrill the lively young detective hosts of fans. As far as how I rated it, I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. For me, this was just kind of one of, I guess I would say Nancy Drew stories kind of have a few different categories where some of them will be more of extravagant kind of mysteries and some are more, I guess, down-to-earth kind of neighborhood mysteries. This one I would definitely consider more of like just like your average neighborhood mystery with Nancy. So I feel like since there's kind of not really a lot of extravagance to this story, it just kind of was a little bit lackluster for me in my opinion. I do have to say it was a little bit suspenseful at trying to figure out how the villain does keep getting into the house and things like that. So that was one point that did kind of keep me guessing throughout the book. But I feel like once it was kind of revealed, I was kind of like, I don't know, seems a little cheesy, but it was still a cute story overall. We do have another orphan that is a character in this book, so I won't spoil anything just in case. But overall, when it comes down to it, this one just wasn't my favorite. It just kind of comes down to like a spooky house with a crazy cat lady and a whole bunch of undertones of child abuse and mental illness. So this one was just a little bit, I don't know, not my favorite. So unfortunately, I give this one 2 out of 5 stars. So the next book we have is book number 17. This one is called Mystery of the Brass Bound Trunk. The original was published in 1940 and the revised story was published in 1976. All right, so the synopsis for this one says, from the moment Nancy Drew boards an ocean liner leaving for New York, she becomes involved in a new and dangerous mystery. A man on the pier gestures to someone on board in the sign language of the dead. Beware of Nancy Drew and N.E., he signals. Who is N.E.? Can it be Nelda Detweiler, a young South African who shares a cabin with Nancy, Bess, and George? When Nancy learns that Nelda has been accused of stealing a diamond bracelet in South Africa, she wonders whether the girl is a thief or the innocent victim of a vicious plot. Then, an unclaimed brass-bound trunk delivered to Nancy's cabin by mistake shortly after she embarks becomes the first clue that leads her to believe an international jewel thieves are on board. And soon afterwards, she realizes that her life and the lives of her friends are in danger. Mystery and intrigue follow the girls across the ocean, but with her usual ingenuity, Nancy solves the mystery and defeats her enemies before the ship reaches New York. One critique I do have of this book, and this again is not a spoiler, it starts off with Nancy, Bess, and George coming back from a trip from Rotterdam, and it's just kind of like, hold on a minute, wait, you're just gonna start the story that they went to the Netherlands and you're not gonna talk about that and it's not part of the story really at all? And that was one thing that really kind of like felt like a missed opportunity for me, because I was like, that could have been a really like fun, interesting plot point to kind of have them maybe start the mystery in the Netherlands and then they got on the ship and stuff, but the story just kind of picks up right on the ship. Plus, I think it's the first international location given at all for any of the Nancy Drew books we've read so far, so it just seemed like a missed opportunity that they could have kind of started with a little bit of interest internationally, but unfortunately they didn't. I have to say, as far as the mystery goes for this one, I feel like it was pretty much of a straightforward kind of mystery, but there are, I would say, two really big events that happen in the book. One we'll say natural and one will say unnatural, but I really thought the first one was a little bit far-fetched, but it was still a really fun, interesting Nancy Drew book. But another little tiny critique that I have, and again, this is not a spoiler, but throughout the book, sign language is a big part of the mystery, but I don't know if it was just like when it was written or the time or what, but they, instead of calling it sign language, they keep referring to it as finger language, and it just kind of gave me the ick reading finger language over and over and over. So I don't know. I wish they would have just like revised it to just being called like sign language or something, but finger language just felt very weird and untimely. Also, Nancy does have a little bit of like a boat romance, I guess I would say, and it just kind of seems a little bit close with especially Nancy having her special friend Ned. Okay, so my rating of this book now, I have to say, I gotta give it a little bit of a caveat. I rated this book based on how it made me feel when I was reading it, how I, just the vibe of the story and everything like that. Not so much purely based on just the mystery itself, because if I had to rank it on just the mystery, I would say I'd give it maybe more of like a 3 stars, but I ranked this one 5 out of 5 stars because, number one, I just really love like the idea of like cruise ships and everything like that, and that was just like kind of a really fun, interesting setting for this book, and it just kind of got me in a really like fun and adventurous mindset for this book. So I give this one a 5 out of 5 just for how much I enjoyed reading it, but not so much for the actual contents of the mystery itself, if that makes sense. All right, and next we have book number 18. This one is called Mystery of the Moss-Covered Mansion. This one was originally published in 1941 and the revised was published in 1971. So this one starts out, a friend of Carson Drew's has been arrested and charged with sending a truck loaded with explosive oranges into the Space Center complex at Cape Kennedy. That's the first sentence. Exploding oranges at the Space Center. Would you have thought that based on this book cover? Because I sure didn't. Knowing that Mr. Billington could not possibly be guilty of sabotage, Nancy and her father rushed to the defense of the accused man. During the Drews' investigation, Nancy becomes suspicious of an old, spooky mansion. Behind a high steel-meshed enclosure, fierce African wild animals roam over the extensive grounds. Through a ruse, the clever teenage detective discovers that something besides the training of wild animals is going on at the mysterious moss-covered mansion estate. Many dangerous moments await Nancy before she proves Mr. Billington's innocence and thwarts the plans of treacherous subversives bent on undermining the U.S. space program. You guys, this is one of the craziest Nancy Drew books I have ever read. Number one, the cover art just is very different than what you would expect based on knowing how the actual revised storyline goes. And this is one of the books where I really truly do want to read the original text because it's so completely different. Like I said, this one, you know, you can't imagine this one being placed in 1940s because of course the Space Center wasn't even built then, and there's just so many allusions and mentions that just screams the 70s. We have like station wagons and we have party lines and just everything, the Space Center, NASA, everything like that. Just, it's very, very 1970s and you can't get away from that at all. So this one, as far as the timeline of the revised text, really kind of took me out of the timeline as far as the actual entire series so far. So this one was just a completely different book on its own. I ranked this one 4 out of 5 stars, not because of the story itself, but because there is so much bananas stuff that goes on in this book. I kind of wish I could do like a spoiler version for just this book because this is the most ridiculous Nancy Drew book I have read so far. First off, the entire premise of exploding oranges just sounds absolutely hilarious. And there seems to be a lot of unnecessary plot points that happens in this book that either never comes around to making any type of significance in the story or, you know, ever coming back to anything. I can think of a couple specific situations where that happens, but of course I don't want to spoil those. And another thing that just seems to be the case, that every character Nancy interacts with in this book seems to be one of the most unpleasant people you would ever think of. My notes on this book are actually quite hilarious, but again, they are spoiler ridden, so I will just have to save those for another time. But you guys, this is just another Nancy Drew book on a whole nother planet. And not to mention how the whole villain reveal, you know, final escape situation on this book. Guys, just take my word for it. This one is just one of the most bizarre Nancy Drew books ever. Alright, moving on to the next book, we have book number 19. This one is called The Quest of the Missing Map. This one was published originally in 1942, and I don't have the revised date on here. Let me see, actually. Looks like the revised was published in 1969. Alright, so the synopsis of this one starts out with, "No, no, I won't go there. 7-year-old Trixie Chatham cries out. The ship cottage is haunted." Prompted by her concern for the frightened child, Nancy investigates the small studio of the Chatham estate. What the astute young detective discovers leads her to believe that there is a connection between the mysterious occurrences at Ship Cottage and her search for a treasure island. With only a few slim clues to guide her and half a map and Tomlin Smith's vague memories, Nancy sets out to find Mr. Smith's long-lost twin brother who possesses the rest of the map that will pinpoint the location of buried treasure willed to them by their father. Constantly beset by danger and intrigue, Nancy courageously outwits her enemies and solves one of the most challenging cases in her career as a teenage investigator. Okay, so for this book, I gave it 3 stars. Just because this book is very heavy on the whole idea of finding a treasure. And while everything leading up to that is, you know, kind of all part of the mystery and interesting in its own rank, I felt like the part where they actually do the treasure hunting was so rushed and so crammed at the very end. It just kind of bummed me out because that was the part I was really looking the most forward to, and it just didn't really do it justice in this story. And we have an orphan double doozy in this one because we do have one character that is a full orphan, and he is the father of a character in this book, but also the young girl Trixie in the story that was at the beginning of the synopsis. She is also we'll call her a partial orphan as well. So we got 2 for the price of 1 on this book. One thing I did like about this book is that this is the first time Nancy is ever mentioned as being in school. And in this one, she is in art school. And that, of course, is part of the mystery and kind of helps with how she solves certain clues. This is another Nancy Drew that is just kind of heavy on coincidences. At one point, Nancy is trying to find a sea captain to help her with something, and she just happens to find one walking down the street. A little bit coincidental, if you ask me. This is also another one of those Nancy Drew books that has a lot of villains, and another thing that they do a lot at the time in Nancy Drew books is they will give villains funny sounding names or silly names, and you can kind of just pinpoint right off the bat who is going to be a villain based on what their name is like, and that is definitely the case in this story. So there are some funny character names in this one. So overall, this one I felt like had a really good chance at being like a really fun, adventurous story, but I felt like it just kind of fell flat towards the end, and I feel like if they paced the book out a little bit differently, it would have been a little bit more interesting to read, because it just seems like everything is building up to this one point, and you think that they're going on this really fun like expedition, and then it just kind of gets really rushed in my opinion. So overall, I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. Alright guys, and the final book for this review is book number 20. This one is called The Clue in the Jewel Box. This one was originally published in 1943, and the revised story was from 1972. Alright, so the synopsis of the story is: an antique dealer's revelation about a former queen's priceless heirloom starts Nancy on a trail of exciting adventures. Madame Alexandra, now living incognito in River Heights, asks Nancy to find her missing grandson. With only one clue to go on, a faded photograph of the prince at age 4, the young detective begins her search, which rapidly involves her in a series of dangerous and harrowing adventures. When Nancy needs help, she calls on Bess, George, Bert, Dave, and her special friend Ned. How Nancy's discovery of the heirloom secret unmasks a slick imposter and reunites the long-separated family, climaxes this suspense-filled mystery story. So with this book, if you have ever read or heard of the story of Anastasia, this one is pretty much to the T that story. With that being said, I rated this one 3 out of 5 stars because actually this was one book that I didn't think I had read before, but as I started reading the story, little details started coming back to me and I remembered, hey, this is a story that I have read when I was younger. So a lot of the story kind of like came back to me in bits and pieces, but I couldn't remember every single detail. But as I started reading this one, this was definitely one I read as a kid. Another thing that this book does is they're always referring to a foreign land, a native land, a homeland, and it's very obviously Russia, but they never name it and they only just kind of like tiptoe around it. But it's quite obvious what they're referring to, but they never come out and say it, which is a little, I don't know, annoying, I guess. Especially since the entire storyline is following the whole plot line of Anastasia. Even character names in the story can be allusions to the Anastasia story. There is a character named Marie, there's a character named Anna, and there is a character named Mr. Faber, which is, I believe, an allusion to the Fabergé eggs, which are part of the actual story here. And we also get to see a guest appearance from Helen Corning Archer, who was one of Nancy's original friends through the first 4 Nancy Drew books. And she makes an appearance in this one, so it's kind of like fun to see little character cameos. And the last time we saw Helen was in book number 4, which was the Mystery at Lilac Inn. One little teeny tiny minor spoiler I will give, it's not even a true spoiler, but it's just kind of a weird spot that just really kind of made me think. At one point in the story, Nancy asks Ned, "How are you at kidnapping?" And Ned's response is, "Expert." Is that not the biggest red flag ever, Nancy? And it just kind of seemed, there were a few moments in this book where it seemed kind of out of character of Nancy and her friend group and things that happened where just kind of was a little bit strange, and that coupled with Ned claiming to be an expert kidnapper seems quite bizarre in my opinion. Overall, I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars, mainly because the story wasn't as exciting or not as enjoyable, I would say, for me, based on 2 reasons. One, because I had read this book before and a lot of the details were coming back to me, but 2, because the story is so similar to Anastasia, you kind of can spot this storyline a mile away once you start reading it just because of the similarities of it. But it was still a good read, but I only gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. Alright guys, so that is everything for this Nancy Drew No Spoilers review. I hope you guys enjoyed these videos. If you did, please like and subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram, link is below. Until my next video, I will talk to you guys later. Bye.